Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we wander through the streets of ancient Rome, not the marble temples of poets and emperors, but the smoke-choked alleys, the markets slick with rot, and the Colosseum where men and beasts are fed to the crowd like bread crusts. Forget the triumphal arches and golden rhetoric. This Rome runs on sweat, blood, and the kind of bread that can break a jaw. Each day repeats itself with the cruel efficiency of a machine. Hunger in the morning, lies at the forum, blood in the arena, and wine-stained chaos by night. You may think you know the eternal city, but here, in the cycle of its common hours, you'll see it for what it truly was. Eternal only in its noise, its cruelty, and its refusal to let anyone rest. Before we begin, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's super amazing how there are so many viewers across the world who enjoys this type of content. Please be sure to drop a comment below to let me know what part of the world you're listening from. I would truly appreciate that. Now lay back, relax, maybe have some wine, with a cozy blanket, and let's travel together. Way, way back together. Imagine closing your eyes and finding yourself in the middle of ancient Rome, in the shadow of the largest stadium the world had ever seen. The Colosseum looms ahead, its arches stacked like teeth in a jaw, grinning at you with the promise of spectacle and suffering. The stone walls are stained with centuries of sweat, blood, and spilled wine, though the crowd doesn't seem to mind. It's not just a building, it's a factory for noise, a machine designed to grind out entertainment the way a butcher grinds sausage. And tonight, you have no choice but to take your seat. At dawn, the city is already alive with movement. Merchants hawk roasted nuts and figs on skewers, their voices cutting through the chatter of thousands pushing toward the entrances. The smell is a confused blend of perfumes, garlic, and the unmistakable tang of humanity pressed too close together. Men in tunics shove and bicker, women hoist children on their hips, and slaves dart back and forth carrying amphorae of sour wine. Above it all, the Colosseum stands like an indifferent god, yawning open its gates to swallow the crowd whole. You shuffle forward, shoulder to shoulder, as if being herded into history itself. Inside, the noise multiplies. Every cough, every laugh, every swear word echoes across the vast stone bowl, until it feels like the building itself is alive and mocking you. The seating is divided with brutal precision. Nobles up top under shaded awnings, senators reclining on cushions brought by their slaves, and commoners like you packed onto hard stone benches. If you were hoping for comfort, you should have been born wealthier, or at least bribed the right official. Instead, your seat offers splinters and a view blocked by the broad shoulders of the man in front of you, who appears to have bathed last month and decided it was optional afterward. The first events of the day are animal hunts. Trumpets blare, gates creak open, and out charge bears, lions, and exotic beasts dragged from every corner of the empire. The crowd erupts, not because they care for the animals, but because watching terrified gladiators face them is considered wholesome family fun. You can't help but notice the animals are starved, their ribs poking out, their eyes wild. The gladiators fare no better, armed with flimsy spears and even flimsier hope. When the lions pounce, the audience roars louder than the beasts, children clapping while blood sprays onto the sand. Somewhere, a vendor sells honey cakes to the rhythm of human screaming. By midday, the sun turns merciless. The stone beneath you burns your legs, and the air is so thick with dust you feel like you're inhaling a sandbox. The nobles are shielded by awnings, fanned by slaves who occasionally wave away the smell of roasting flesh from the arena. Down in the seats of the poor, people fan themselves with whatever scraps of cloth they can find. You swat flies, sip warm water from a clay cup, and try to ignore the smell of the man beside you. Half sweat, half goat cheese. Around you, people gamble on who will die next, tossing coins as if human life were no more than a dice game. The executions follow, sand darkened with blood now churned to mud beneath the sun. Condemned criminals are paraded out, their crimes shouted for all to hear. Thieves, deserters, traitors. Some beg, some curse, some stumble silently. They're stripped, shoved into the arena, and given wooden sticks or nothing at all before wild animals are loosed upon them. It's not justice, it's theatre. The crowd watches with the same glee you'd reserve for a comedy show, though the punchline is always the same: death. You wonder what crime might land you down there, and whether jaywalking in Rome is punishable by lion. By afternoon, it's time for the main event, gladiators. Trumpets blare, the gates swing wide, and men stride into the arena clad in mismatched armour, shining helmets, and grim determination. They raise their weapons to the emperor, who barely glances up from his plate of figs. The crowd howls for violence, some shouting for mercy, others for death. When blades clash, sparks fly, and the noise is deafening. Every strike, every grunt, every scream reverberates up into your chest until you feel the fight as much as see it. The unlucky fall quickly, their blood soaking into the sand already sticky with the morning's carnage. The lucky survive a few more minutes before exhaustion drags them down. As shadows lengthen, the games drag on. Your back aches from the hard stone, your legs cramp, and your throat feels like sandpaper. The crowd, however, is tireless. Wine flows freely, cheap food passes from hand to hand, and songs erupt between bouts of bloodshed. Fights break out in the stands almost as often as in the arena, though nobody seems to mind. A tooth clatters down the steps, met with laughter. The atmosphere is part carnival, part slaughterhouse, and entirely exhausting. You long for silence, for a bed, for anything but the endless roar of humanity demanding more death. By nightfall, the Colosseum is sticky with the residue of the day. Blood on the sand, wine on the steps, sweat on every body. The final trumpet sounds and the crowd stirs, a restless tide spilling out into the streets of Rome. The exits choke with thousands pushing at once, voices still raised, feet stamping on stone. Vendors shout their final sales, drunks sing off key, and the stench of the city greets you like an old friend, smoke, urine, and cheap wine. You stumble along with the rest, ears ringing from hours of noise, eyes heavy with fatigue. Somewhere in the chaos, you realize you'll never look at entertainment the same way again. You shuffle out of the Colosseum in a human tide pressed between bodies that smell of sweat, leather, and overripe figs. The stone arches spit the crowd into the streets, and suddenly Rome feels alive in a way that borders on madness. Thousands pour into alleys and forums, their throats roar from shouting, their sandals slapping against cobblestones slick with spilled wine. Street sellers bark at you from every corner, offering everything from cheap olives to questionable cuts of meat. If you're lucky, it's goat. If you're not, you don't want to know. Children dart between legs, hands snatching at purses, while drunks stagger arm in arm singing songs that seem to have lost both melody and dignity hours ago. The taverns are crammed full before you even reach the first one. Lamps flicker, throwing greasy yellow light across tables stained with decades of spilled ale and broken promises. Inside, the air is thick with smoke from oil lamps, and the smell of humanity packed too tightly into too small a room. Men argue loudly over the day's fights, slamming fists on wooden tables, each certain their favourite gladiator was robbed of victory. One man shouts that the emperor himself blinked at the wrong time, proof of divine unfairness, while another insists the lions looked unusually sluggish. Somewhere in the corner, a woman laughs so hard she spills wine down her tunic, only to scoop it back up with her fingers. Waste not, want not. Outside the taverns, the streets are no quieter. Fires burn in braziers, smoke curling into the night sky, and musicians strum lutes and pipes, their melodies drowned beneath the roar of drunk Romans. Prostitutes call from shadowed doorways, their offers blunt, their laughter sharper than any sword. Beggars shuffle on the edges of the crowd, holding out hands as if today's entertainment hasn't already drained every coin from the city. Stray dogs fight over scraps in the gutter, their snarls blending seamlessly with the shouts of gamblers still tossing dice on dirty blankets. Rome after the games is less a city and more a festival of exhaustion, where sleep is optional and chaos mandatory. As you stumble through the streets, your feet blistered from hours of standing, you notice how the city itself seems drunk. The marble statues glare down with hollow eyes, their once proud faces spattered with grime. Water trickles from fountains where revellers wash their hands, splash their faces, or simply vomit before carrying on. The aqueducts hum with the constant rush of water, though you suspect much of it will be wasted on the next batch of public baths, where men sit shoulder to shoulder, sweating in pools and pretending they're philosophers. You long for quiet, for darkness, for any corner not echoing with laughter, shouting, and the occasional sound of someone being sick in Latin. Eventually, you find yourself pushed toward a narrow alley where the noise thins out into a softer murmur. The lamps here are fewer, the shadows deeper, the laughter replaced with the low whisper of conspirators or the faint sob of someone who lost more than coins in the games. A dog trots past with what looks suspiciously like a human bone clamped in its jaws, though you decide not to investigate further. Your head throbs, your eyes burn, and all you crave is a flat surface on which to collapse. Rome may be eternal, but your patience is not. You finally drift into a quarter of the city where the laughter and shouting soften into a steady drone, like bees trapped in a jar. The streets here are narrower, lined with insulae, tall apartment blocks stacked so high they look ready to collapse under the weight of their own ambition. You can hear every life inside them, pots clanging, babies crying, couples arguing in Latin about who forgot to buy bread. The walls are so thin you could sneeze and your neighbour would bless you before you finished. A guard patrols the street half-heartedly, torchlight flickering across his helmet, though he looks less interested in maintaining order than in finding a place to sit down. Inside your building, the climb is endless. Each floor creaks under your sandals, wooden steps bending as though daring you to test their loyalty. The higher you go, the cheaper the rent, and you've managed to secure a spot near the roof, where the wind whistles through cracks like an unwelcome lullaby. The corridor smells of boiled cabbage and too many people in too little space. Doors slam, voices rise, and somewhere a lute plays a tune so out of key it should be considered a crime against Rome itself. You push into your room and find exactly what you expected. 4 stone walls, a straw pallet, and the lingering scent of mildew so strong it could apply for citizenship. The pallet greets you like an enemy pretending to be a friend. The straw crunches beneath your weight, releasing a cloud of dust and something that may or may not be alive. Fleas leap happily onto your skin as though you've returned from a long journey just for them. You pull a thin blanket over yourself, scratchy enough to be woven from old rope, and listen to the chorus outside your door. Someone argues about stolen sandals, another practices poetry loudly enough to make you wish he'd never learned the alphabet, and from below comes the rhythmic thud of a couple enjoying their evening with enthusiasm unmatched by discretion. If silence is golden, Rome is bankrupt. Sleep, however, is stubborn. The air is warm and sour, the floor beneath you thrums with footsteps, and the walls are paper-thin confessions of every life around you. From one side, a child wails. From the other, an old man coughs so wetly you feel damp just listening. A drunk in the alley belts out a hymn to Bacchus, mangling the lyrics so badly the god himself would revoke his wine privileges. You shift, scratch, sigh, and pray to whatever deity might trade a moment of quiet for all the coins you don't have. The fleas nibble, the straw pokes, and Rome, eternal and unforgiving, refuses to let you rest. At last exhaustion seeps in, heavy and slow, dragging your eyelids down like lead shutters. The din fades to a distant hum, the torchlight through the cracks blurs into a dull glow, and your mind drifts somewhere between waking and sleep. You almost forget the day of blood and spectacle, the roar of the Colosseum, the stink of sweat and wine. For a moment it feels like peace, until the neighbour's rooster crows 2 hours early, reminding you that in Rome even dreams aren't safe from interruption. Dawn creeps into Rome not with silence, but with a racket that feels like the gods themselves are hammering on your skull. The rooster, who clearly skipped every lesson on punctuality, crows again, this time joined by others scattered across the city like an amateur choir determined to ruin sleep for everyone. From the floor above, someone drags a heavy pot across the wooden boards, a sound like thunder rolling through your skull. Below, a baby cries with the persistence of a politician begging for votes. Your straw pallet has left you itchy, bitten, and with a stiff back that suggests you wrestled a mule in your sleep and lost. The Colosseum may be closed, but your neighbours are happy to provide the encore. The smells hit next, carried on the morning air that seeps through the cracks in your wall. Someone nearby is boiling cabbage, and the scent rises with all the grace of a corpse being exhumed. Another neighbour seems to be baking bread, but the pleasant aroma is ruined by the fact that it's mixed with the stench of chamber pots being emptied into the street below. The sound of liquid splashing on cobblestones echoes upward, followed by curses from passers-by, unlucky enough to be baptised by waste. Rome's sanitation system may boast aqueducts and sewers, But none of that matters when your upstairs neighbour decides gravity is the easiest solution to plumbing. You shuffle down the creaking stairs, stepping carefully to avoid loose boards that could betray you to the street below. The stairwell is crowded with neighbours heading out at the same time. Workers, slaves, vendors, everyone elbowing their way toward another day of survival. You exchange glances but not words. Conversation costs energy, and energy is already in short supply. By the time you reach the ground floor, you're greeted by the true smell of Rome at dawn, horse dung, rotting food scraps, and the faint perfume of desperation. Outside, the city stirs like a beast roused too early from sleep. Vendors already shout about fresh vegetables that don't look fresh, while others hawk fish whose eyes are cloudy enough to predict rain. Beggars stretch their hands from doorways, their voices soft but insistent, as if practiced from birth. Children dart through the crowds, barefoot and nimble, their fingers searching for unattended purses like bees to honey. You keep one hand on your belt pouch, though truth be told it contains nothing but lint and misplaced optimism. Above it all, the morning sun strikes the Colosseum in the distance, its walls glowing golden, as if to remind you of yesterday's violence dressed up as glory. And then comes breakfast, the Roman answer to the eternal question of how to start a day on an empty stomach. A crust of bread, perhaps dipped in watered wine or olive oil if you're fortunate. If not, it's just the bread, hard enough to double as a weapon if someone tries to steal it. Wealthier Romans may dine on figs, honey or cheese, but for most, the morning meal is an exercise in chewing until your jaw gives up. You gnaw away, staring at the bustling street, and wonder whether it's worth saving your energy for another day of entertainment at the Colosseum, or if one day of blood, dust and fleas was already more than enough. The Forum buzzes like a hive as the morning wears on, and you're swept along in its current whether you like it or not. Merchants set up their stalls with the confidence of men who know their figs are half rotten, but will still sell before noon. Fishmongers slap their wares on wooden boards, the smell carrying so far that even Neptune would hold his nose. The butchers are no subtler, dangling hunks of meat before flies that seem to have paid in advance. Each shout, each call, blends into a chaotic chorus: fresh bread, good wine, best sandals in Rome. By the time you pass the third vendor selling the exact same tunics, dyed in the exact same shade of disappointing beige, you realise the true Roman art is not engineering but salesmanship. Workers stream through the city, heading for whatever occupation keeps them fed, at least most days. Carpenters haul timber, their shoulders permanently bent from years of labour. Porters stagger under loads of amphorae, their backs slick with sweat, leaving trails of olive oil on the cobbles. Bakers, already coated in flour, shout at boys sent too late to fetch bread. Everywhere you look, someone is working, someone is begging, and someone is trying not to be either. For the slaves, there is no choice at all. Their work begins before sunrise and ends only when their masters tire of exploiting them. For free men, there is at least the consolation of complaining about it loudly. The sounds of hammers, saws, and shouting echo through the streets, punctuated by the occasional bray of a mule who clearly wishes it had been born anything else. Rome prides itself on order, but the streets say otherwise. Wagons jammed in endless queues, curses flying as drivers whip their animals forward, pedestrians darting between wheels with a gambler's faith. Dust rises with every passing cart, settling on tunics, hair, and lungs alike, until the whole city wears the same dull, choking shade of brown. You cough, along with everyone else, and wonder if this is how Rome maintains unity, by drowning every citizen in the same dirt. By midday, the sun glares overhead, merciless and bright, baking the stone streets until they shimmer. The markets swell with crowds seeking shade where there is none. Beggars drag themselves into the middle of the Forum, clutching crutches or inventing new ailments with Oscar-worthy performances. Children shout and chase each other through the stalls, their laughter interrupted only when they're cuffed by angry vendors. Musicians pluck out songs on lutes, their strings frayed, their voices cracked, but they play with the tenacity of men who know silence pays even less. And everywhere, the Colosseum looms in the distance, its walls a reminder that while work and markets keep Rome alive, blood and spectacle keep it entertained. As the sun climbs higher, Rome begins to sweat. The streets shimmer under the midday glare, and the stone walls radiate heat like ovens left open too long. Sandals slap against the cobblestones, raising dust that sticks to damp skin and turns every face into a mask of grime. Men wipe their brows with the hems of their tunics. Women fan themselves with whatever scraps of cloth they can find, and slaves simply endure, their sweat as invisible to masters as the labour it springs from. By now the city smells less of bread and figs, more of scorched garbage and unwashed humanity, a perfume that could knock out even the hardiest barbarian. The wealthy retreat first, disappearing into shaded villas where servants wave palm fronds and pour cool wine. For everyone else, the solution is the public baths, those great Roman temples of hygiene and gossip. You join the stream of citizens heading toward them, pushed along by men who treat bathing less as cleanliness and more as sport. Inside, the air is thick with steam, bodies glistening in the light of torches. Pools of varying temperatures await, hot enough to boil ambition, warm enough to dull thought, and cold enough to remind you you're alive. Men argue politics waist-deep in water, philosophers mutter half-finished theories through clouds of vapour, and teenagers cannonball in with the grace of falling bricks. Privacy is non-existent, but then again, so is shame. The baths double as Rome's social hub, where secrets slip as easily as sweat. Senators plot legislation while scrubbing their backs with pumice stones. Merchants brag about profits no one believes, and poets recite verses that sound far more profound when muffled by steam. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, trying to ignore the fact that the water is changed about as often as emperors. Fleas swim merrily alongside citizens, perhaps more loyal to Rome than many of its governors. When you finally emerge, skin red and headlight, you wonder if you're cleaner or simply parboiled. By late afternoon, the taverns come alive once again. Wooden doors swing wide, spilling noise into the streets as men rush inside for wine, dice, and the comforting illusion of wealth. The cheapest wine tastes like vinegar mixed with regret, yet it flows freely, staining lips and loosening tongues. Dice clatter on tables, coins vanish into other men's purses, and someone always accuses someone else of cheating. Voices rise, fists follow, and soon the tavern's entertainment rivals the Colosseum's, though here the losers only bleed on the floorboards. Outside, peddlers sell roasted chestnuts and meat on skewers, the aroma tempting even those who know it's probably yesterday's leftovers reheated. Meanwhile, the streets hum with the restless energy of a city that never stops moving. Carriages rattle, laden with goods, their wheels squeaking like dying animals. Children play in alleys with sticks and pebbles, their laughter sharp and fleeting. Beggars cluster at temple steps, lifting their voices in pitiful harmony that competes with the prayers inside. And all around, the walls of Rome drink in the heat, holding it until nightfall, when the city will breathe it back out like a dragon unwilling to sleep. You can feel the weariness of the day settling in, but Rome, relentless as ever, insists there is more yet to endure. As the sun sinks behind Rome's 7 hills, the heat doesn't vanish. It lingers, rising from the stones like a final insult. The streets, however, come alive again. Oil lamps flicker to life, casting pools of golden light that tremble against the walls, while shadows gather in the alleys like conspirators waiting for orders. The air cools slightly, but it brings no peace. Instead, it sharpens every sound. Sandals scuffing, coins clinking, dogs barking, and voices echoing off marble facades. Rome at night is less a city and more a performance, every street a stage where beggars, drunks, and schemers improvise their parts. The taverns are louder now, their wooden shutters flung open to release a cacophony of laughter, shouting, and the occasional crash of a table being overturned. Inside, men sing songs they barely know, stomping in rhythm until the floor shakes, while women laugh at jokes too crude to bother translating. Wine pours like water, though it's often watered down enough to taste like grape-flavoured disappointment. Dice games spiral into fistfights, wagers turn into debts, and debts turn into promises backed only by the hope of not being stabbed on the way home. A man at one corner strums a lute so badly it sounds like the instrument is trying to escape him. No one cares. On the streets, vendors work their final shift, selling skewers of roasted meat that smell far better than they look. Customers line up anyway, gnawing at charred morsels and pretending not to wonder what animal they came from. Children, restless even at night, run in packs, laughing and darting through the crowd like stray cats. Beggars remain at their posts, their voices cracked, their bowls nearly empty. Priests in flowing robes walk solemnly to temples, their dignity somewhat undermined by the fact that one is clearly drunk. Even in worship, Rome knows no silence. Above it all, in the higher quarters, the wealthy dine by lamplight in courtyards cooled by fountains. Servants rush with trays, slaves refill cups, and conversation drifts lazily over roasted peacock and honey cakes. From the outside it looks like elegance. From the inside it is gossip disguised as philosophy and indulgence passed off as culture. The gap between rich and poor is as wide as the Tiber itself, but at night both classes are united in one truth. No one in Rome ever really rests. And so, as the lamps flicker and the stars struggle to pierce the city's haze, Rome hums on. Voices mingle with the chirp of insects, the occasional bray of a donkey, and the soft pluck of distant music. Somewhere, a thief slips a hand into an unattended purse. Somewhere else, a couple argues in whispers that turn into shouts. The city's pulse is relentless, its rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Impossible to escape. You step into the evening air, weary from the day, yet knowing Rome has no intention of letting you drift quietly into sleep. By midnight, the streets thin at last, though Rome never truly sleeps. The taverns sputter out one by one, their lamps guttering as the last drunkards stagger into the night, voices slurred into chants that only they understand. Some collapse where they stand, sprawled across doorsteps or curled against fountains, their snores mingling with the trickle of water. Others lurch through alleys, seeking homes they may or may not remember. The stones are slick with spilled wine, the air heavy with the sour tang of sweat and cheap alcohol. If silence has arrived, it has come drunk, late, and still loud enough to rattle your bones. The watchmen patrol with torches in hand, their armour clinking, their eyes half shut from exhaustion. They shout warnings to thieves who are already 3 steps ahead, slipping into shadows with purses full of other people's coins. From time to time a cry echoes through the alleys, a mugging, a quarrel, perhaps a lover's fight turned violent. The watchmen sigh, debate whether it's worth the paperwork, and then keep walking. Rome's justice, like Rome itself, is selective, fierce for the weak, blind for the powerful. You keep your head down, your footsteps soft, and hope not to be mistaken for either victim or suspect. The insulae loom darker now, their windows mostly shuttered, though life seeps out in whispers. You hear the muffled cough of a sick child, the groan of a couple arguing through gritted teeth, the squeak of a rat making itself at home. A sudden crash breaks the stillness as someone upstairs drops a clay pot, the shards scattering onto the street like cheap fireworks. A dog barks furiously, silenced only when its master throws a boot in its general direction. The city may be quieter, but it is never still. Every shadow hides a noise, and every noise hides a story. Beyond the streets, the Colosseum itself rests in eerie silence, its arches black against the starlight. The sand inside still holds the day's blood, drying into a crust that will be raked away come dawn. The benches stand empty, though the ghosts of shouts and screams seem to cling to the air. It feels less like a building at rest, and more like a beast sleeping lightly, ready to roar again with the next sunrise. The silence here is heavier than in the streets, thick with memory, the kind that presses against your ears until you swear you can still hear the lions growl. Back in your own narrow room, you lay once more on the straw pallet, your body sore, your skin itching from the fleas that refuse to take the night off. The sounds of Rome filter through the cracks, a drunk still singing, a baby crying, a cart rumbling far away. You try to drift, eyelids heavy, but even in the dead of night Rome hums on, its heartbeat never ceasing. Sleep creeps closer, but it is a fragile sleep, always on the edge of being stolen by the next noise, the next smell, the next reminder that in this city rest is a luxury reserved for no one. The first hours before dawn belong to the bakers. While the city still snores and coughs in its sleep, they are already stoking their ovens, coaxing flames to life with smoke that seeps into the narrow streets. The smell of baking bread winds its way through the alleys, soft and warm, yet even this comfort has a catch. The bread is coarse, heavy, often mixed with whatever filler the miller could sneak past inspection. Barley, beans, even sawdust if you're unlucky. Rome may pride itself on its bread, but in truth, It is only slightly more edible than the stones the ovens are built from. Still, after a day at the Colosseum and a night of taverns, the scent is enough to wake even the dead, or at least the drunk who wish they were. Elsewhere, the slaves begin their day, rising in silence long before their masters stir. They creep through villas with buckets of water, sweeping courtyards and preparing breakfast for households that will never thank them. The clang of pots, the scrape of brooms, the shuffle of bare feet, it all blends into the city's muted heartbeat. For many, this is the only time of day when Rome feels quiet, though it is a quiet enforced by exhaustion and fear. The slaves themselves wear it like a second skin, the knowledge that rest is never theirs, that freedom is a dream more distant than the rising sun. Their tired faces are the backdrop of the empire, invisible in daylight, inescapable in truth. The markets too begin to stir, long before the first customer arrives. Vendors stumble from their beds to set up stalls, muttering curses at the weight of their goods. They haul baskets of olives, crates of figs, and bundles of herbs, arranging them with care that will go unnoticed by buyers who haggle over every coin. The fishmongers are loudest, dragging their catch through the streets, leaving a trail of scales and blood for the stray dogs to fight over. Their voices carry announcing fish so fresh they are practically swimming away, though in truth most have been dead since yesterday, and smell accordingly. By the time the sun peeks over the horizon, the stalls will be ready, bright with goods that look more appetizing than they taste. And then there are the night watchmen, trudging home as the sky pales to grey. Their torches burn low, their eyes red, their armour streaked with soot from hours of wandering. They have spent the night chasing thieves they could never catch, scolding drunks who laughed in their faces, and pretending to keep order in a city that thrives on disorder. As they peel off into side streets, you realise the cycle is already beginning again. Bakers baking, slaves sweeping, vendors shouting. Rome is a city that breathes in chaos and exhales fatigue, over and over, without ever pausing. Inside your room, the first light of dawn seeps through the cracks in the shutters, tracing pale lines across the wall. The rooster, still alive despite your nightly prayers, crows once more, triumphant in its commitment to being wrong. Neighbours stir, their voices rising, their footsteps echoing against the thin walls. Somewhere nearby, a child begins to cry, as if to remind you that Rome's symphony of noise has no intermission. You pull the scratchy blanket over your head, knowing the city will demand your presence again before long. Sleep teases you, fragile and fleeting, but never enough to hide from the truth. In Rome, rest is just another form of entertainment the empire forgot to invent. By the time the sun clears the horizon, Rome is already wide awake. The narrow alleys flood with footsteps, sandals slapping against the cobblestones in a rhythm that never falters. Merchants shout from every corner, their voices colliding in a storm of offers and insults. Fresh figs, new bread, cheap sandals, only worn by one unlucky soldier. The air is a jumble of smells, fresh bread tangled with the sour stink of fish, roasted chestnuts competing with the pungent perfume of the tanner's vats. It's a marketplace symphony, half commerce, half chaos, entirely Roman. The Forum itself becomes the city's true heartbeat. Crowds press in under marble columns, not just to buy and sell, but to argue, gossip, and pretend their opinions matter. Senators sweep past in robes as white as snow, followed by slaves bent under the weight of scrolls and baskets. Philosophers stand on corners, waving their arms as if the gods themselves needed convincing of their brilliance. One man debates politics with such passion that he spits on everyone within 5 feet. Another declaims poetry so dull that even the pigeons look bored. And through it all, beggars linger, tugging at sleeves and reminding every wealthy man that fortune is a temporary condition. Artisans open their shops, hammering, sawing, chiselling with a vigour that echoes down the streets. Blacksmiths work their forges until sparks leap into the air like tiny meteors. Potters slam clay onto wheels, their arms caked with mud as they coax bowls into being. Carpenters shout at apprentices who trip over wood shavings as if clumsiness were part of the trade. The sound is relentless, a percussion of labour that drowns out thought. For every hammer strike and saw cut, there is a reminder that Rome runs not on marble monuments, but on the sweat of those who will never be remembered. At the same time, the aqueducts hum with water, feeding public fountains where citizens crowd to fill jars. Women chatter as they balance clay vessels on their hips. Children splash with the enthusiasm of ducks, and men curse at the long lines. The fountains are as much a place for gossip as for water, and by the time a jug is full, the owner has learned who quarrelled, who married, and who mysteriously vanished after borrowing too much money. The city's secrets travel faster through the waterlines than through the Senate, and in the distance the Colosseum waits, its arches gleaming in the morning sun like a predator stretching before the hunt. Workers file inside, raking the sand, patching the walls, and preparing for yet another day of blood disguised as entertainment. Posters are plastered on walls, promising new gladiators, rarer beasts and grander executions. Children chatter about who might fight, their innocence disturbingly unshaken by the thought of men being torn apart before lunchtime. Even those who groaned through yesterday's show find themselves pulled back by habit, by curiosity, or by the simple truth that in Rome, the Colosseum is the closest thing to a holiday the common man will ever get. By midday, the pull of the Colosseum is irresistible. The streets stream with citizens once more, flowing toward its arches like ants to sugar. Merchants trail behind them, dragging carts stacked with olives, honey cakes, and amphorae of sour wine, eager to profit from the day's slaughter. The crowd thickens as you approach, sandals scuffing against stone, elbows jabbing, tempers fraying. The smell alone tells you where you are. Sweat, roasted nuts, and the faint iron tang that seems to cling to the arena long after the last fight. Rome might boast aqueducts, sewers, and libraries, but it saves its loudest applause for men killing each other in a sandpit. Inside, the benches fill with astonishing speed. Nobles recline in their shaded seats, sipping wine and complaining that the lions have grown lazy. Senators gossip in low voices, half watching the games, half plotting each other's downfall. The commoners, packed shoulder to shoulder on hard stone, shout themselves hoarse before the first sword is even drawn. Children squeal with excitement, waving small wooden swords carved by desperate parents who can't afford real toys. The poor sit in the highest rows, their view more sky than arena. But even from there, the roar of the crowd rattles their bones. No one comes here for comfort. They come because Rome demands it. The morning programme begins as before. The Venacioned, hunts designed to prove Rome's power over the natural world. Exotic animals burst from cages, lions, leopards, even elephants dragged from Africa, and the crowd howls at the spectacle. Starved beasts stumble into the light, only to be met by hunters armed with spears and nets. The animals roar, the men shout, the crowd shrieks. It is a carnival of cruelty, dressed up as entertainment, and the audience drinks it in like cheap wine. Vendors climb the steps shouting prices, balancing trays of bread and figs on their heads, selling sustenance between screams. As the sun climbs higher, the executions begin and the mood shifts. Condemned men and women are marched into the arena, their crimes announced with great flourish. Thieves, deserters, rebels. Some cry, some curse, some bow their heads in silence. The methods vary. Burning, beating, or the infamous damnatio ad bestias, where prisoners are torn apart by wild animals for the amusement of strangers. The crowd laughs, jeers, cheers, their appetite for misery as endless as the empire itself. You watch as blood spatters the sand, and it occurs to you that Rome has mastered the art of turning death into a public holiday. By the time the gladiators enter, the air is thick with heat and the scent of iron. Trumpets blare and armoured men stride forth, their weapons gleaming, their faces hidden behind helmets. The crowd rises as one, a tidal wave of voices demanding blood, mercy, and spectacle in equal measure. Gladiators clash in the sand, swords ringing, shields shattering, sweat and blood spraying into the air. Some fights end quickly, a single blow silencing a man forever. Others drag on, each strike slower, heavier, until exhaustion brings one fighter to his knees. The audience turns to the emperor, demanding judgment with outstretched hands, their shouts unified in a chant that shakes the stone. Thumbs tilt, lives end, and the Colosseum drinks deeply of its favourite wine. The day stretches on, fight after fight, death after death, until the boundaries between them blur. Your throat grows dry from dust and shouting, your body aches from the unyielding bench, and yet you cannot look away. The Colosseum doesn't just entertain, it traps, ensnares, binds you in its noise and fury. And as the afternoon deepens, the realization dawns. Rome has built a machine that feeds on men, beasts and time itself, and still the crowd begs for more. By late afternoon, the arena floor looks less like sand and more like a butcher's stall. The sun dips lower, turning the stains dark and sticky, the air heavy with the stench of blood baked onto stone. Workers rake the surface in a futile attempt at cleanliness, dragging away bodies and scattering fresh sand over the gore, as if the crowd might forget what their cheers demanded only minutes ago. The trumpets sound one final time, announcing the end of the day's spectacle, and with that the Colosseum exhales. The thousands who filled its belly rise at once, their voices buzzing with excitement, arguments, and drunken chants. It's less a dismissal and more an evacuation, as though the city itself cannot contain the noise. The exodus pours into the streets in a tide of sandals, shouts, and jostling elbows. Men argue over the merits of the gladiators, each certain that their favourite deserved victory. Some bemoan the laziness of the lions, while others insist they saw divine intervention in a man's final desperate strike. Vendors pack their trays, counting coins sticky with sweat and spilled wine. Children swing wooden swords at each other, their play battles interrupted by mothers dragging them away by the ear. The air outside is no cleaner than inside, dust clouds kicked up by the stampede, mingled with the sharp tang of cheap wine and roasted chestnuts. The Colosseum may have ended its show, but Rome itself has only just begun another. Taverns groan under the weight of the influx, doors slam open, benches creak, and wine flows like a second Tiber. Songs erupt, some celebratory, others bitter laments of lost bets. Fistfights break out between men too drunk to remember what they're angry about. One collapses onto the floor, snoring with his face pressed into a puddle of spilled wine, while his friends step over him to order another round. The tavern keeper sighs, knowing tomorrow will bring the same, just with different faces. Outside, dice games spring up in alleys, coins clattering across cobblestones, while gamblers swear oaths in every tongue of the empire. The streets themselves swell into a second arena, alive with revelry and ruin. Prostitutes call out with painted smiles, beggars trail the drunk with outstretched hands, and pickpockets slip through the chaos with fingers as quick as vipers. Fires blaze in braziers, casting shadows that dance across marble walls, and musicians pluck lutes until the strings snap. Even the dogs seem intoxicated, weaving between legs, barking at nothing, chasing scraps thrown from tavern doors. The noise rises into the night air, a reminder that in Rome, rest is not a right but a luxury. And once again, as lamps flicker to life and the stars struggle against the city's glow, the Colosseum looms silently behind you. Its arches gape like the jaws of a predator waiting for its next meal, patient in the knowledge that tomorrow the crowds will return. The cycle is endless. Blood at dawn, noise at noon, wine at night, and exhaustion everywhere in between. You step into the streets, weary and unsteady, knowing Rome has no intention of letting you or anyone ever truly sleep. The night comes on heavy, pressing itself into the streets like an unwelcome guest that never leaves. The taverns howl until their shutters rattle, laughter spilling into alleys alongside the sour stink of vomit. Dice clatter, coins vanish, songs disintegrate into slurred chants, and men stagger arm in arm with women who promise pleasure at a price calculated on desperation. The air is thick with smoke from torches and braziers, curling into shapes that might have been gods once, though even they would likely hold their noses at Rome after dark. You try to walk through it all, but each step feels less like travel and more like surrender, another inch deeper into the city's endless tide. When you reach your insula, the building leans against the night like an old drunk propped against a wall, groaning and shifting with every footstep on its rickety stairs. The climb feels longer than the day itself, your legs aching, your shoulders sagging, your mind still ringing with the echoes of the Colosseum. Neighbours bicker in doorways, their quarrels spilling into the hallway like dirty laundry, and a child screams from somewhere deep inside as if auditioning for the role of human alarm clock. You slide into your own room and collapse onto the straw pallet, the fleas greeting you like loyal pets. The air is hot, stale, and buzzing with life too small to see but too persistent to ignore. Outside your window the noises continue, carts creaking on their late deliveries, sandals scuffing down cobblestones, a drunk singing a hymn to Bacchus in a voice so cracked it could shatter marble. A dog barks once, twice, and then keeps barking, as though he's determined to outlast the moon. You pull the scratchy blanket over your head, but the city seeps through the fabric anyway, its heartbeat too loud to shut out. Sleep comes slowly, grudgingly, dragging you under like a river current you can't fight. And even as you sink into it, you know it won't last. Because before long the rooster will crow, the bakers will stir, the slaves will rise, and the city will lurch into motion again. The markets will open, the forum will echo with gossip, and by midday the Colosseum will fill once more with voices demanding spectacle. Rome does not rest. It never has, and it never will. Its cycle of blood and noise, sweat and dust, wine and exhaustion spins on without pause. You may drift off now, heavy-limbed and weary, but the city waits just outside your door, ready to wake you again. Dawn again, though it hardly feels like a new day. The rooster, smug in its own incompetence, crows before the sky even thinks of a light. Your eyes open, heavy, gritty, your body stiff from a pallet that seems to have plotted against your spine. Outside, the stairwell groans with footsteps of neighbours starting their day, vendors hauling baskets, slaves dragging buckets, children whining before they have even put on their sandals. The city has reset itself as though the night were nothing more than a pause between acts in a play. And you, of course, are still in the audience, whether you bought a ticket or not. The smells return first: bread baking, cabbage boiling, chamber pots emptying with the reckless splash of gravity. The same mix, the same chorus, as though Rome had written a recipe for mornings and never thought to change it. The breadline forms at the baker's stall before dawn has fully cracked, and men grumble about the quality even as they bite into loaves that could chip teeth. The fishmongers arrive soon after, hauling catches that smell like they've already made peace with death. You watch as women haggle fiercely, voices sharp enough to slice more deeply than any knife. The market is alive again, vibrant, loud, repetitive, eternal. By midday you're swept back toward the Colosseum with the tide of citizens, carried as much by inertia as by choice. The benches are the same, the crowd the same, even the gladiators start to blur together, their helmets and swords reflecting a light that feels crueler today. The trumpets blare again, the gates creak again, and the cycle begins again. Animals rush into the arena, men scream, blood spills, sand drinks, the crowd roars. Each cheer is familiar, each gasp rehearsed, each death just another note in Rome's endless song. You can't tell if it's the second day or the 20th. The Colosseum has a way of erasing numbers. The exodus at dusk feels like déjà vu. The same vendors, the same shouting, the same taverns belching laughter and fists into the night. You stumble through the streets, trying to remember if you were repeating yesterday or previewing tomorrow. Lamps flare, shadows stretch, dice clatter on blankets, prostitutes call out from doorways, and the smell of cheap wine follows you like a curse. Even the stars above seem weary, flickering weakly through the haze as if they've grown tired of watching Rome act out the same grim comedy every night. And so, another bed, another pallet of straw and fleas, another restless attempt at sleep while the city hums outside. The rooster will crow again too early, the bakers will rise again, the markets will swell again, and the Colosseum will open its jaws for another day of blood. In Rome, the cycle doesn't end. It grinds on, indifferent, relentless, eternal. One day bleeds into the next, and the next, and the next, until even sleep feels like just another spectator sport. Another dawn, another rooster shrieking its victory over silence, reminding you that Rome never truly stops. Your bones ache from straw, your skin prickles from fleas, your throat scratches from dust. Yet the city calls, the streets already buzzing with sandals and shouting. The bakers shove loaves into ovens, smoke curling into the morning sky, while vendors drag carts across cobblestones, cursing as their wheels splinter. The same smells return, as familiar as breath: bread, fish, sweat, cabbage, waste. You could swear you smelled it all yesterday, and you did. You will again tomorrow. The forum stirs with its usual chorus, philosophers flapping their arms like injured birds, senators gliding past in spotless robes carried by hands that will never be clean, beggars crouched in the shadows, hands outstretched like roots desperate for water. The words change, but the rhythm doesn't. Arguments about politics, wagers over races, gossip about emperors, each repeated with new faces but the same exhausted passion. Even the pigeons look as though they've heard it all before. By midday the Colosseum opens, swallowing the city whole. Trumpets blare, gates creak, and the arena fills with the same roars, the same blood, the same sand soaking the same stains. Animals charge, gladiators clash, criminals die, crowds scream. You've seen it already, yet it feels compulsory to watch again, as if Rome itself insists. Your body aches on the hard stone bench, your ears ring with the thunder of thousands, your eyes blur with dust and heat. And still you stay because leaving would mean silence, and silence is the one thing Rome cannot permit. Evening spills out of the Colosseum into taverns and alleys. The same dice clatter, the same fists fly, the same songs are sung in voices hoarse from wine. Shadows stretch across the walls, lamps flicker in the wind, and the city becomes its own echo. Every laugh repeated, every cry familiar, every footstep a twin of the last. You stumble back to your insula, climb the same groaning stairs, collapse onto the same straw that scratches your skin. Outside, the dog barks, the drunk sings, the baby wails. You drift, heavy-limbed, into the same uneasy sleep you've known every night since Rome began. And then dawn comes again. The rooster crows again, the bakers rise again, the markets swell again, the Colosseum waits again. The cycle grinds forward, endless, eternal, indifferent. Rome repeats itself, day after day, night after night, until even your dreams march in circles dusty and loud. You cannot escape it, because no one in Rome ever truly does. The rooster starts its off-key symphony well before the sun bothers to appear, shrieking like a creature possessed by Jupiter himself. The neighbours curse it in several dialects, yet no one has the courage to wring its neck. After all, the bird technically belongs to someone important, and in Rome, killing the wrong rooster can get you crucified before lunch. Down in the street, the bakers are already shoving loaves into ovens, sweat dripping into the dough in quantities best not considered. Smoke drifts lazily upward, stinging the eyes of anyone foolish enough to open a window. Still, the scent of bread is intoxicating enough to make half the city forgive the taste of sawdust hidden in the flour. By mid-morning the forum is awake again, louder than any rooster. Philosophers are already standing on stones, declaiming grand theories about virtue while picking their noses. Senators glide past in spotless white togas, pretending they're too dignified to sweat in the heat, though the stains on their armpits say otherwise. Beggars cluster at the base of the columns, their hands outstretched in practiced rhythm, their expressions perfected over years of watching pity curdle into irritation. Gossip spreads faster than disease here. Who slept with whom? Who bribed which magistrate? Who mysteriously fell into the Tiber after saying the wrong thing about the emperor? Rome prides itself on its politics, but to the casual observer it looks more like a circus without the lions. And then, inevitably, the Colosseum yawns open once more, swallowing the city's energy like a hungry god. The crowd files in, sandals scuffing, voices booming, anticipation so thick you could spread it on bread if you had any left. The benches groan under the weight of thousands, each person shouting as though their lungs were competing for the emperor's attention. The hunts begin. Beasts dragged from across the empire, some so exhausted from the journey they barely look dangerous. The crowd boos at a tired bear, as though it should be grateful for the chance to die for their amusement. The hunters, sweating and grim, prod the animals into violence, their own survival hinging on the enthusiasm of a half-starved lion. It's theatre, blood-stained and brutal, but Rome applauds as if it were high art. The executions follow, and the crowd leans in with the delight of children at a puppet show. Condemned criminals shuffle out, eyes wide, their fates already sealed. Some plead for mercy, some curse, and one man simply yawns, as though bored by his own death. They're handed wooden sticks, pitted against animals or gladiators, and the outcome is never in doubt. The audience howls when a lion drags a man across the sand, as though cruelty were a comedy routine. Vendors wander the aisles hawking honey cakes and cheap wine, pausing only to watch a man's head come clean off his shoulders. If this is justice, it's justice with a punchline. By the time the gladiators take the field, the air is a haze of dust and screams. Men in mismatched armour raise their weapons in salute, and the emperor waves a hand like a man bored of choosing dinner. The crowd erupts, cheering for blood, mercy, and everything in between. The first clash of swords rings out sharp and final. Some fights end in seconds, others drag until exhaustion pulls both men into the sand, their bodies heaving like beasts beaten half to death. The crowd chants for death or mercy, their voices rolling like thunder, and the emperor's thumb decides whether a man breathes or becomes another stain in the sand. Rome never wastes an opportunity to gamble on a stranger's mortality. When the games end, the exodus begins. The crowd pours into the streets once more, their energy undimmed, voices echoing against stone as they argue over which gladiator cheated or which lion deserved better training. Taverns burst open, tables groaning under mugs of wine diluted enough to taste like grape-flavoured regret. Dice rattle, fists fly, songs lurch out of tune, and the city drowns itself in noise until the lamps are lit. Shadows stretch across alleys where thieves sharpen their skills on drunks too slow to notice. Prostitutes call out with offers as blunt as their humour, while pickpockets dance through the chaos like artists perfecting their craft. Rome doesn't end with the games, it merely shifts arenas. Back in the insula, you drag yourself up creaking stairs that threaten to collapse beneath the weight of so many lives. Your room smells of mildew, sweat, and regret. The fleas already assembled like old friends waiting for your return. You collapse onto the straw pallet, listening to the same chorus through the thin walls, a baby wailing, a couple arguing, a drunk singing to the wrong god. The cycle presses against you like a weight you can't shake. Sleep comes grudgingly, dragging you under even as the city hums in your ears, and before long you know exactly what will follow. The rooster seems louder this morning, though in truth it's probably just your nerves fraying. It crows at the wrong time, as always, a bird with a broken sense of rhythm but an unshakable sense of duty. Neighbours curse it. A baby wails in sympathy, and somewhere a man throws a shoe that misses by a spectacular margin. The bakers are already at it, their ovens belching smoke into the alleys. The bread smells heavenly, though it tastes like ambition mixed with plaster. Still the crowd lines up, grateful for anything to soak in wine. Even sawdust, when baked at 400 degrees, tastes like survival. By mid-morning the markets swell, their voices colliding into one relentless roar. A fishmonger waves a slippery catch that looks less like dinner and more like a threat. A butcher dangles sausages with the pride of a man who knows mystery meat doesn't have to be explained if it's salted enough. Vendors selling olives swear theirs the best in Rome, though they've clearly come from the same basket as everyone else's. Children chase each other through the stalls, knocking over amphorae and escaping punishment with the speed of demons. Overhead the aqueducts murmur, carrying water that will be diluted by wine before the day is out. The Forum, meanwhile, is a theatre of nonsense. Senators parade in spotless togas, robes so white they practically glow, though everyone knows their consciences are darker than a sewer at midnight. Philosophers argue loudly, hands waving, scrolls flapping, each convinced his words will save the empire while pigeons decorate his shoulders with their own commentary. Beggars cluster at the edges, offering curses disguised as blessings to anyone stingy enough to pass without a coin. Somewhere in the mix, a man is being tried for treason, though the crowd seems more interested in whether his shoes match. And then, inevitably, the Colosseum draws the city into its gullet once again. The trumpets blare, the gates creak, and the benches creak louder under the weight of thousands eager for blood. The hunts begin. Elephants lumbering, lions prowling, leopards darting, all dragged here from places most Romans couldn't find on a map. The beasts are exhausted, frightened, and more confused than dangerous. Still, the hunters prod them into frenzy, and the crowd howls when claws and teeth do what claws and teeth are born to do. Vendors shuffle through the stands, balancing trays of figs and shouting prices over the sound of dying men. The executions follow, grim little plays acted out for the masses. Criminals shuffle into the arena, half-dressed, half-terrified, each given a role they didn't audition for. Some cry, some swear, one cracks a joke and gets a laugh before the lion ends his set. The crowd eats it up, thrilled at the pageantry of suffering, and boos when a death comes too quickly. Rome demands not just blood but a performance, and mercy is the one thing in shortest supply. It's justice, but only if you define justice as creative ways to kill someone before supper. When the gladiators take the field, the crowd surges to its feet as if struck by lightning. Helmets gleam, swords flash, shields crash, and the sand turns slick under their feet. Some men fight like lions, others like lambs, but all of them fight like men who know the alternative is worse. The emperor, seated in bored majesty, raises or lowers his thumb with all the enthusiasm of a man deciding between figs and dates for dessert. A life ends, a life continues, and the Colosseum grinds on. You find yourself cheering too, because in Rome, even disgust has been weaponized into applause. When the games finally end, the city bursts outward again. The crowd spills into taverns, alleys, and streets. Their throats roar, their sandals worn but their appetites undimmed. Taverns roar with songs so flat they'd make a donkey wince. Dice clatter across sticky tables, and men shout promises of repayment no one believes. Prostitutes lean from doorways with painted smiles. Thieves glide like shadows, and beggars curl into corners waiting for leftovers. Rome is as lively after death as it is during it. The blood of the arena exchanged for the wine of the streets. And then, back again to the insula, climbing stairs that sound like they've been planning collapse since Caesar's day. Your room waits, hot and cramped, smelling of mildew and sweat, fleas jumping for joy at your return. You collapse, the straw digging into your back, your eyes closing against the chorus outside, the dog barking, the drunk singing, the baby crying, the city humming. Sleep pulls you under like a reluctant favour, and you know exactly what waits when you wake. The rooster hasn't learned a thing since yesterday. Its voice still cracks, its timing still atrocious, its persistence still maddening, yet it crows with such misplaced confidence you almost admire it. Almost. The bakers, yawning and flour-streaked, shovel dough into ovens that roar like volcanic mouths. The smell of bread fills the street, promising warmth and comfort, but when you finally bite into it, you realise it tastes less like grain and more like disappointment. A neighbour mutters that the baker's loaves are shrinking each week. Another swears the flour has been stretched with chalk. No one cares. Rome eats what it's given, and if it breaks a tooth, so be it. Dentists are only slightly less terrifying than gladiators. The city's arteries clog quickly. Carriages grind along cobblestones, their wheels screeching like tortured fiddles. Drivers shout obscenities so elaborate they deserve their own plays. Mules groan under loads meant for armies, their eyes glazed with existential despair. Vendors clash with beggars over prime street corners, each insisting that space belongs to them by divine right. An old woman hawks garlic cloves so shriveled they look like relics. A boy waves bundles of wilted herbs, claiming they'll cure headaches, coughs, and possibly treason. Rome believes everything, doubts nothing, and pays too much for both. At the Forum, the pageant resumes. Politicians rehearse speeches about virtue while discreetly collecting bribes in the folds of their togas. Philosophers argue whether the world is made of atoms, fire, or the sheer volume of their own voices. One man recites poetry to pigeons, insisting they understand him better than senators. Beggars play their part too, staging coughs and limps with more theatrical skill than half the actors in Rome. You linger long enough to catch a public trial. The accused staring blankly as his fate is decided by men who've already planned their lunch. The verdict is swift, guilty of something vague, sentenced to something brutal, and destined for a starring role in today's entertainment. And so, the Colosseum swallows Rome whole once more. The trumpets shriek, the crowd surges, and the gates vomit forth animals dragged across continents for this single moment of misery. Tigers blink in the sunlight, bewildered, their chains still rattling from the sea voyage. A rhino stumbles into the sand, bewildered to find itself thousands of miles from home, with an audience screaming for blood. The hunters jab, the beasts roar, and the crowd drinks in the violence like cheap wine, spilling crumbs of honey cake onto the corpses below. In this arena, even awe smells faintly of sweat and manure. The executions come next, and the crowd cheers louder than at any triumph. Condemned men stumble into the open, each carrying a wooden weapon that couldn't slice butter. They are fed to animals, to gladiators, to creative cruelty dreamt up by officials desperate to outdo yesterday's carnage. One man is tied to a stake while wolves tear at his legs. Another is flung to leopards who seem more interested in licking the sand. The audience boos until the animals remember their cues. Death is not enough. It must be memorable, theatrical, something to chatter about over supper. Rome craves suffering with artistry. The gladiators follow, their armour dented, their faces hidden, their muscles gleaming with sweat and resignation. They salute the emperor, who waves absently, his mouth full of dates. The fighting begins. Swords clash, shields splinter, men groan and bleed. The crowd rises and falls like a tide, chanting, screaming, begging for blood. One man fights with the fury of a cornered wolf, only to collapse when exhaustion betrays him. The other raises his blade, waiting for judgment. The emperor toys with the moment, his thumb twitching lazily, enjoying the power of dangling life and death like a child teasing a cat. And then, mercy or death. It hardly matters. Tomorrow there will be another fight, another man, another corpse. When the games end, the city explodes outward like steam from a boiling pot. Taverns swell with bodies, wine splashing, dice clattering, songs slurred into nonsense. Fights break out over debts so small they could be solved by sharing a loaf of bread. But in Rome, pride is always worth more than food. Prostitutes stroll the alleys with painted smiles sharper than daggers. Thieves slip through crowds, lightening purses, and beggars squat by doors hoping for scraps. Fires blaze in braziers, smoke curling skyward, while musicians hammer out songs so off-key they sound like the city itself groaning. And then, at last, the insula. The same stairs, the same groans, the same stench. You drag yourself up, scratch at bites you stopped counting days ago, and collapse onto the same straw pallet that greets you like a vengeful enemy. Outside, the drunk sings, the baby cries, the dog barks, the city hums. Your eyes close, heavy, aching, and you know what waits. The rooster greets the morning like a professional insomniac, loud, unapologetic, and perfectly wrong in its timing. You wonder if the gods gave it lungs simply to torment humanity. Down in the street, bakers drag their weary bodies into the oven's glow, sweat dripping into dough that no one wants to imagine too closely. The air fills with the scent of bread that promises nourishment, but delivers indigestion. By the time you join the line, the loaves are already hardening, and the man in front of you swears his last one contained a pebble large enough to build an aqueduct. Rome doesn't care. If you want soft bread, you should have been born rich. The city churns to life like a beast coughing itself awake. Carriages grind their wheels against stone, splinters flying with every turn. Drivers whip their mules as if beating them harder might summon divine horsepower. Vendors shout until their voices crack, advertising figs that look like they've been through war, olives that taste like brine and regret, and wine so thin it might actually be water in costume. Beggars spread themselves at every corner, their hands outstretched, rehearsed whimpers spilling from lips that know the art of pity better than any senator knows politics. Rome feeds some, ignores most, and tramples the unlucky without pausing. At the Forum, the familiar farce resumes. Politicians thunder about justice while pocketing bribes faster than dice players pocket winnings. Philosophers wave their scrolls, declaiming the nature of the universe as though shouting loud enough might rearrange the stars. One insists the world will end in fire, another in water, and a third in boredom, which, judging by the crowd's glazed eyes, may already be happening. Trials are held in public for maximum humiliation, the condemned staring blankly as sentences are handed down with casual cruelty. Justice in Rome is less about fairness and more about spectacle, which explains why half the city shows up just to watch. And then the Colosseum again, the empire's favourite stomach. Trumpets blare, gates creak, and the crowd stampedes inward as if they might miss something new, though nothing here ever truly changes. The Venetians begin, bears lumbering, panthers leaping, lions pacing. Some beasts attack, others cower, but the crowd demands blood regardless. Hunters stab, nets fly, claws tear, and the sand drinks it all in without complaint. Vendors circulate, selling bread crusts and sour wine at prices so inflated they'd make a usurer blush. Parents hand their children snacks as if slaughter were just another school lesson. The executions follow like clockwork, grim punctuation between the hunts and the games. Criminals shuffle into the arena with eyes wide, their futures already spent. Some die quickly, others slowly, the crowd measuring entertainment value by the length of the screams. The unlucky are paired with animals, the very unlucky are paired with creativity. Rome never runs out of new ways to kill someone. It's practically the empire's most reliable export. And yet the crowd howls approval, delighted to see misfortune packaged as justice, cruelty served with applause. The gladiators stride in last, gleaming under the noon sun, weapons raised in salute to an emperor who may or may not be awake. The crowd explodes, voices tumbling over one another in chants that roll like thunder across the stone. The fights are brutal, sweaty, desperate, steel against steel, men collapsing into the sand with each blow. Shields splinter, helmets dent, blood runs in rivulets, until the arena looks less like a battlefield and more like a butcher's floor. The emperor waves his hand lazily, deciding with all the enthusiasm of a man choosing between figs and dates whether someone lives or dies. The crowd screams approval either way. When the games end, Rome pours back into its streets swollen with energy. Taverns burst with bodies, their floors sticky with spilled wine, their tables scarred with dice gouges and fist marks. Men shout until their throats crack, debts are tallied in bruises, and songs limp from one verse to another until even the singers give up. Prostitutes beckon with promises sharper than any blade. Thieves glide through the crowd with hands like whispers, and beggars crouch by doorways hoping the rich will stumble. The city is one endless carnival of exhaustion, fueled by blood in the day and wine at night. Back at the insula, the climb feels heavier, the stairs older, the air thicker. Your room greets you with the same mildew, the same straw, the same fleas plotting their nightly feast. You collapse onto the pallet, eyes heavy, body aching, ears full of the muffled chorus outside, dogs barking, babies crying, drunks mangling hymns to Bacchus. Sleep teases you, then takes you, dragging you into a shallow dream where sand, blood and shouting echo even in silence. And before long, dawn again, rooster again, bakers again, Colosseum again, taverns again, Rome again, Rome again, Rome again. The rooster is relentless, shrieking into the dim grey morning as though it alone keeps the sun from abandoning Rome altogether. Neighbours curse, slaves groan, and somewhere a man throws a clay jug at the bird, missing so badly that it shatters against his own wall. The bakers stoke their ovens, sweat dripping freely as they pound dough with fists that look more suited to tavern brawls than bread making. The air fills with smoke and the faint sweetness of yeast, but the bread itself emerges in loaves so hard they could double as building material. Rome calls it breakfast. Your teeth call it assault. The streets swell early, alive with the complaints of mules and the curses of drivers hauling carts stacked higher than common sense. Wheels splinter on cobblestones, stalls collapse under the weight of yesterday's produce dressed up as today's goods, and vendors shout until their voices shred. A fishmonger swears his catch is fresh from the sea that morning, which would be remarkable considering Rome is hours inland. A butcher waves cuts of meat that look suspiciously like they came from dogs rather than pigs. Still the crowd haggles, bargains and buys, because in Rome, hunger rarely bothers asking questions. The forum churns like a cauldron. Politicians thunder about the empire's glory, while discreetly scratching at lice under their togas. Philosophers declaim grand truths, while their students sneak off to gamble in the shade. A poet performs verses so long-winded that even the pigeons give up and fly away. At the edge, beggars stage elaborate dramas. One man collapses theatrically in front of senators, another produces a fake limp so convincing it deserves an ovation. Everyone here is acting. The only difference is that some are paid in coins while others are paid in bruises. By midday, the Colosseum reclaims its audience like a jealous god. Trumpets blare, gates screech open, and the crowd surges inward, eager for violence dressed as spectacle. The hunts begin. Half-starved lions, bewildered camels, elephants so weary they barely lift their trunks. Hunters jab spears, the beasts lash out, and the sand drinks deeply. The crowd howls approval, vendors shove figs into greasy hands, and mothers hush their children with snacks while men are disemboweled yards away. It is education, Roman style, the lesson that everything, man, beast, and time itself, exists only to be consumed. The executions follow with grim inevitability. Criminals, deserters, the unlucky, all paraded into the sand to meet justice Rome style. Some face wild beasts, others face each other, handed weapons as useless as twigs. The crowd roars louder for the hesitant, booing men who won't die quickly enough to be entertaining. The Emperor raises a hand, waves a thumb, and lives vanish on a whim. Mercy is rare, and when granted, it feels less like kindness and more like the Empire keeping a few spare bodies around for next week's games. Gladiators take the stage, glittering under the punishing sun, their weapons gleaming, their eyes hidden behind iron and exhaustion. They clash, shields buckling, swords ringing, blood spraying in arcs that stain the first rows. The crowd surges as one, chanting, baying, demanding. Some gladiators die with defiance, others with resignation, all of them swallowed by the roar of thousands. For the men in the sand, the difference between life and death is no more than the twitch of an emperor's thumb, and Rome applauds either way. When the day's carnage ends, the city pours outward again, a flood of noise and stench. Taverns groan with bodies, wine flows until it tastes more like vinegar, and dice games erupt with shouts and threats. Fistfights break out as naturally as laughter, blood splattering tavern floors only hours after it covered the arena's sand. Prostitutes beckon from alleys. Thieves dart through crowds with fingers light as whispers, and beggars shuffle behind the drunk hoping for dropped coins or crusts of bread. Rome after the games is simply Rome without pretense, brutal, loud, and endlessly alive. Back in the insula, the climb feels steeper, the air thicker, the palate scratchier. You collapse onto the straw, fleas biting with their usual enthusiasm. Outside, the chorus begins, a dog barking until its throat gives out, a drunk mangling a hymn to Bacchus, a baby wailing as though auditioning for tragedy. The city hums and grinds, restless and unrepentant. Your eyes close despite the noise, your body too weary to protest, and you sink into the shallow sleep that Rome allows. The markets groan awake, stalls creaking, hawkers shouting until their throats rasp. A fishmonger slaps a limp eel onto his board with all the drama of a gladiator's entrance, swearing it's fresh despite the clouded eyes staring back. The butcher waves a cleaver above cuts of meat that could be lamb, or rat, depending on who you ask. Spices are hawked by merchants in robes brighter than their wares, while beggars trail the crowd with hands outstretched, their voices cracked but persistent. A boy darts between legs, slipping coins from purses with the grace of a priest lifting offerings. Rome calls it theft. The boy calls it breakfast. At the Forum, the farce continues as if scripted. Senators sweep past in spotless white, their robes whiter than their reputations. Orators bellow about justice and virtue, their spittle carrying farther than their logic. Philosophers scowl at each other, declaiming about the nature of truth while their students nap against the columns. At the fringes, beggars stage collapses worthy of the theatre, coughing up red dye to simulate blood, groaning until someone tosses a coin just to shut them up. Rome prides itself on wisdom and law, yet to the passerby it looks more like a marketplace of egos held together by pigeons and lies. By midday the Colosseum devours the city whole. The gates moan open, trumpets blare, and thousands surge inward, hungry for violence as though it were bread. The venations begin. Lions, leopards, bears, all dragged across the empire to die here. Some fight, some cower, some collapse in exhaustion, but the crowd jeers equally at all. Hunters jab spears, nets whirl, sand darkens with blood. Vendors climb the stands shouting, "Figs! Wine! Bread!" as if the death of a camel pairs nicely with a honey cake. Rome believes it does. The executions follow like clockwork, a grim mid-show diversion. Prisoners shuffle out, some sobbing, some silent, one daring enough to spit in the sand. They're cut down by gladiators, or torn apart by beasts, or burned in contraptions designed by men with too much time and too little mercy. The crowd laughs, cheers, points. Death is not tragedy here. It is cabaret. A man's final scream is as disposable as yesterday's bread crust, and tomorrow another will take his place. Rome never runs out of criminals or enemies or unlucky scapegoats. When the gladiators enter, the crowd surges like a single body, roaring so loud the marble trembles. Swords clash, shields crack, blood spatters across the sand. Some men fight for glory, others for survival, but all fight for Rome's amusement. The emperor gestures idly, his thumb deciding futures with less effort than it takes to choose lunch. One man falls, the The crowd howls, another rises, the crowd howls again. It doesn't matter who wins, only that the sand drinks enough blood to justify the ticket price. Rome calls it entertainment. History will call it madness. By evening the city bursts outward, spilling its frenzy into taverns and alleys. Wine flows until it tastes like vinegar. Dice rattle across tables sticky with old spills, and arguments escalate into bruises faster than mugs can be emptied. Prostitutes beckon from shadows. Thieves glide with silent fingers. Beggars linger at doorways hoping drunken hands grow generous. Fires blaze in iron braziers, smoke staining the sky while musicians pluck lutes so badly they might as well be strangling cats. Rome after the games is not calmer, it is merely a different kind of blood sport. At the Insula, the stairs groan like old men, every step a threat to collapse. Your room waits, damp and narrow, fleas buzzing with anticipation. You collapse onto the pallet, straw prickling your skin, and the chorus begins again outside. The dog barking itself hoarse, the drunk warbling hymns to Bacchus, the baby screaming like an oracle foretelling doom. Sleep drags you under despite the noise, shallow and unsatisfying, but Rome never asked you to rest. It only asks you to endure. The next morning drags itself into being, grey and sour, as though the city is reluctant to wake but too stubborn to stop. The air is damp, the alleys slick from chamber pots emptied in the dark, and the first footsteps echo as slaves hurry with buckets and brooms. The bakers are already bent to their ovens, sweat plastering their tunics, their eyes dull with fatigue. The smell of bread drifts out, thick and promising, but everyone knows better. It will be coarse, crumbly, and better suited for building repairs than eating. Yet the line forms as always, because in Rome, breakfast is less about flavour and more about surviving long enough for the next loaf. As the day grows, so too does the noise. The markets roar to life, with merchants screeching over one another like birds fighting for scraps. A man selling dates swears they're sweeter than Venus's kiss, though they look as wrinkled as an old senator's face. Butchers slap knives into slabs of meat, their aprons crusted with yesterday's blood. The fishmongers have developed the art of lying into performance, insisting their fish were caught that morning while the smell proves otherwise. Crowds haggle viciously, not for sport but for survival, every coin fought over like it might be the last. The forum is no better. Politicians puff their chests and declaim about justice, with the energy of men who haven't gone hungry in decades. Philosophers hold forth, waving scrolls like weapons, while pigeons coo and relieve themselves as the only sensible commentary. Street performers try to lighten the gloom with juggling or flutes, but they're drowned out by public trials held for the sheer pleasure of humiliating the condemned. A man accused of theft swears innocence, but the crowd has already decided he's guilty because his sandals are too fine. Rome doesn't need facts, Rome needs entertainment, and justice conveniently doubles as theatre. By midday, the Colosseum breathes in the masses again. The trumpets split the air and the gates groan, as though tired of repeating the same misery day after day. Today it's crocodiles, dragged from Egypt and dumped into an arena they don't understand, snapping wildly at gladiators who prod them with spears. The crowd gasps at the novelty, children shriek with delight, and vendors shout themselves hoarse selling figs and watered wine to grease the spectacle. Some crocodiles die quickly, others stumble confused until dispatched. It hardly matters. Rome applauds, satisfied that yet another corner of the world has been conquered and commodified. The executions that follow are as inventive as they are cruel. A pair of prisoners are forced to fight each other with wooden sticks, the crowd laughing at their clumsy swings until one collapses. Another is tied to a post and left for wolves, who prowl uncertainly until goaded forward. The crowd boos when the man dies too quickly. Suffering is an expected luxury, and Rome feels cheated if it doesn't get its coin's worth. For the condemned, dignity dies long before the body does. For the audience, it's all part of the afternoon's amusement. The gladiators arrive next, and the noise swells to a storm. Men stride out in gleaming armour, their eyes hidden, their futures already written in sand. They clash with brutal precision, steel on steel, blood spraying in arcs that paint the first rows. The crowd surges to its feet, screaming for mercy and for death in the same breath, demanding the emperor's verdict as if life itself were a wager to be won or lost. A thumb twitches, the crowd roars. and another man vanishes into history. Rome feeds on the spectacle, and the Colosseum ensures there is always more to eat. Evening spills into the streets like a second tide. Taverns shake with song, slurred and staggering, mugs crashing onto tables as dice clatter and fists follow. Prostitutes beckon with painted lips. Thieves melt into the crowds with purses dangling from their fingers, and beggars curl into shadows waiting for drunken generosity. Fires blaze in braziers, the smoke stinging eyes, while musicians hammer out melodies so crooked they sound like the city itself singing. Rome after dark is not calmer, only louder in different keys, every alley echoing with laughter, curses, and the scrape of sandals dragging home. Up the insular stairs again, the climb as exhausting as any gladiator's fight. Your room waits with its familiar mildew and biting fleas, the straw pallet groaning like an old enemy resigned to your weight. Outside, the chorus is eternal. The dog that never tires of barking, the baby that never stops wailing, the drunk who never remembers the words to his own song. You close your eyes anyway, knowing sleep will come in shallow fits, broken and fragile. Rome does not care if you rest. Rome only cares that you wake again tomorrow to do it all over. The morning is damp, the air thick with smoke and sewage, and the rooster makes certain everyone knows it. Its crow cracks like a broken trumpet, each note worse than the last, and yet no one silences it. Perhaps Rome enjoys misery too much to kill such a faithful herald. Down below, the bakers shovel dough into ovens glowing like miniature hells, their faces streaked with soot, their tunics sticking to sweat-soaked backs. The bread smells promising, but when it reaches the market stall it's already stiff, its crust as sharp as pottery shards. People buy anyway, muttering about quality but eating it fast enough to prove they'll be back tomorrow. Hunger is loyal, even when bread isn't. By mid-morning the streets choke with carts and bodies. Mules bray as if cursing their fate. Drivers lash whips like punctuation marks to their swearing, and pedestrians dart dangerously between wheels. Merchants shout themselves raw, advertising fruit that's overripe, vegetables that look half dead, and wine that could clean wounds better than it quenches thirst. Beggars crouch near stalls, children clinging to their sides, their pleas merging with the marketplace like another instrument in Rome's orchestra of misery. In one corner a snake charmer draws a small crowd with a scrawny serpent that looks more exhausted than terrifying. Coins still fall into his bowl. In Rome, anything is worth watching if it distracts from the smell. The Forum is its usual carnival of egos. Senators march past, their spotless robes glowing unnaturally white, each one trailed by slaves staggering under scrolls and baskets. Philosophers shout about destiny while their students eye the nearest tavern with longing. A man accused of stealing sandals stands trial, protesting loudly that they were his own. The crowd doesn't care. His guilt was decided before breakfast. A sentence is handed down and everyone disperses satisfied, having witnessed justice, which in Rome usually means someone suffered in public. And then the Colosseum calls. The gates creak open, trumpets blare, and the crowd surges inside like water through a broken dam. Today, the novelty is ostriches, gangly birds darting across the sand while gladiators chase them with nets. The animals screech, feathers fly, and the crowd howls with laughter, more amused than horrified. Once the birds are caught and dispatched, the audience demands more blood. The executions begin, prisoners shoved into the arena with weapons so flimsy they might as well be reeds, pitted against men in full armour. The outcome is obvious, but the crowd still roars approval, especially when the condemned beg. Rome loves death, but it loves begging even more. Gladiators enter at last, the true stars of the day. They clash with bone-cracking force, their shields splintering, their blades ringing until sparks dance in the air. Sweat streaks their bodies, blood darkens the sand, and exhaustion drags at their limbs. But the crowd never lets them falter. Cries of kill and spare echo like commands to the gods themselves, all eyes turning toward the emperor. A bored flick of his hand, a lazy twitch of his thumb, and lives unravel in an instant. Mercy feels rarer than wine, and far less intoxicating. The benches shake with the noise of 20,000 throats, each one convinced their voice decides fate. When the games end, the streets drink the overflow. Taverns pack with bodies, mugs slamming, dice rattling, curses flying. Men who cheered side by side now bloody each other's noses over debts and boasts. Prostitutes laugh at promises made by drunks too broke to pay, while thieves slink home with purses heavier than their consciences. Fires burn in braziers, throwing wild shadows across marble walls, while musicians strum cracked notes into the air, their songs half drowned by brawls. Rome doesn't calm after the games. It only shifts arenas, trading sand for wine, swords for fists, lions for debts. At night, the insula groans under its tenants, the stairs creaking like a dying man with each footstep. Your room waits as always, narrow, damp, buzzing with fleas that leap to greet you. You collapse onto the pallet, straw poking like tiny spears, the air sour with mildew. Outside, the same chorus, dogs barking as though auditioning for eternity, a drunk howling out hymns to Bacchus, a baby shrieking as if cursing the day of its birth. You close your eyes anyway, because sleep is less a gift here than a form of surrender. The morning begins with smoke already thick in the alleys, the smell of burning wood and yesterday's waste colliding in the damp air. The bakers shove loaves into ovens before the sun has risen fully, their faces pale with fatigue, their arms moving automatically as though their muscles remember the work better than their minds. The bread comes out crusty, brittle, and already stale, but buyers line up anyway, jostling for their share. Some mutter curses about the shrinking loaves, others gnaw in silence, teeth straining against crusts hard enough to double as roof tiles. The city runs on bread and blood, and bread at least is affordable. The markets are chaos by mid-morning, every stall shouting louder than the next until the air is thick with arguments. A spice seller offers powders so weak they might as well be coloured dust, swearing they came from India. A fishmonger slaps down a catch that smells like it swam its last stroke 2 days ago, insisting the stink is authentic. A butcher dangles sausages of such dubious origin that even the flies seem cautious. Yet coins change hands all the same, because in Rome appetite forgives everything but emptiness. Children weave through the crowd, stealing fruit, darting away before fists can find them. Beggars groan at the edges, hands stretched toward people who can barely feed themselves. At the Forum, the theatre of Rome's ego takes over. Senators strut in spotless robes, their sandals carried by slaves who will be whipped for scuffing them. Philosophers roar their theories across open air, shouting about truth while their followers sneak dice games behind them. A poet performs verses so dreary, even the pigeons abandon his shoulders. Public trials play out for anyone with time to jeer. One man is accused of cheating on his taxes, though the only evidence seems to be that his neighbours dislike him. His guilt is assumed, his punishment assured, and the crowd disperses pleased with the morning's entertainment. Rome never distinguishes between law and spectacle. It treats both as synonyms. By noon, the Colosseum pulls the city inward like a black hole. Trumpets blare, drums thunder, and the gates unleash misery for mass consumption. Today it's bulls, horns lowered, eyes wide, driven into the sand while hunters jab spears at their flanks. The beasts thrash, charging blindly, tossing men into the air like dolls, while the crowd roars its delight. Vendors climb the benches, balancing trays of bread and figs as if men being gored are no more distracting than bad weather. The sand grows slick, the air metallic, but the applause is deafening, drowning out screams as thoroughly as thunder swallows rain. The executions arrive as the midday climax. Prisoners shuffle forward in chains, their faces grey, their futures already burned away. Some weep, some curse. One stares so blankly he might as well be carved from marble. They are torn apart, cut down, burned, humiliated, each method crueler than the last because cruelty here must always innovate. The crowd laughs when a man slips on his own blood, boos when a lion loses interest, cheers when a blade severs a head in a single stroke. Mercy is an insult, suffering is currency. Rome never runs out of either. Gladiators stride out in the afternoon sun, and the noise shakes the stones. Helmets glint, blades shine, shields splinter as the fighting begins. The air thickens with dust and cries, blood spraying into the stands until nobles wrinkle their noses but keep watching. Each strike, each clash, each groan is swallowed by the chant of thousands, voices demanding death or begging for mercy, both shouted with equal passion. The emperor sits bored, fiddling with dates, deciding lives with the twitch of his hand. The arena is a furnace, and men are its fuel. When the games finally collapse into silence, the city erupts outward again, spilling into taverns that overflow with sweat, wine, and noise. Dice roll, mugs crash, fists fly, and voices rise until the whole street shakes with drunken chaos. Prostitutes call from alleys with promises as hollow as the wine, while thieves glide past, fingers quick and cold. Fires burn in braziers, shadows lurch across walls, and musicians strike notes so sour they sound like prayers gone wrong. Rome in the evening doesn't soften. It only changes masks, wearing laughter over cruelty, wine over blood. At night the insula creaks as though its bones are ready to snap. You drag yourself up the stairs, your legs aching, your throat parched, your ears ringing with a day's worth of shouting. Your room greets you with a sour smell of mildew, the straw pallet biting your back, the fleas already marching across your skin like victorious legions. Outside, the chorus begins again. Dogs barking, drunks mangling hymns, a baby shrieking itself purple. You close your eyes, not because the city quiets, but because your body no longer gives you a choice. Sleep is shallow, broken, and temporary. Like everything in Rome, it exists only long enough to prepare you for more of the same. Morning arrives not gently, but with the scrape of shutters, the bang of doors, and the dull thud of buckets being dragged down staircases. The streets below reek already. Smoke from ovens, steam from boiling cabbage, and the sour tang of waste tossed into gutters during the night. Bakers are at their posts hauling heavy trays of bread from the flames, their faces streaked black with soot. The loaves, warm and fragrant, vanish into hungry hands within minutes, though anyone who bites too quickly discovers the familiar truth. The crust is like stone, the centre like sawdust, and the price higher than yesterday. Complaints ripple through the crowd, but coins still change hands, because in Rome, breakfast is less about satisfaction and more about survival. By mid-morning, the city's arteries clog with carts, shouting vendors, and bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. Fishmongers stand on their boards, slapping limp, glassy-eyed catches and swearing they were pulled fresh from the sea that morning. A spice merchant in gaudy robes waves dusty powders as though selling fragments of Olympus itself. Butchers hack at carcasses with grim precision, flinging scraps onto the ground where dogs and children fight for them alike. Beggars line the streets with outstretched hands, inventing new coughs and limps to coax coins from passers-by, who are only one misfortune away from joining them. Above it all, curses echo from drivers as their mules dig in their hooves, refusing to move another inch. The forum swells like a stage, actors playing their parts with practiced flair. Senators parade through in spotless robes, pretending virtue while clutching bribes hidden in folds of cloth. Orators bellow speeches no one listens to, their words drowned by the chatter of traders haggling over figs. Philosophers argue with such ferocity you'd think truth itself were on trial, while their students sneak wine behind marble columns. At the edges, trials play out as public theatre. One man is accused of stealing grain, another of insulting a magistrate. Both are declared guilty with the same efficiency you'd use to swat flies. Rome's sense of justice has less to do with fairness than with how quickly the crowd gets bored. By noon, the Colosseum opens its jaws again, swallowing tens of thousands. The hunts begin with exotic animals dragged from corners of the empire. Today it's tigers, half-starved, snarling, their stripes gleaming in the sunlight. Hunters prod them with spears, trying to make the beast perform as the crowd demands. A tiger rips a man's leg clean off, and the benches explode in delight. Vendors shout prices over the screams, honey cakes and watered wine sold without pause. The sand turns slick, the air stinks of iron, and Rome applauds as if cruelty itself were a civic duty. The executions come next, and the crowd leans in, hungry for the spectacle. Prisoners stumble into the arena pale and hollow-eyed. Some mutter prayers, some scream insults, others collapse before the first blow is struck. They are cut down quickly or slowly, depending on the cruelty of the officials arranging the entertainment. A man is tied to a stake and set upon by dogs. Another is forced to fight with a wooden stick against an armed soldier. The deaths are not justice. They are punctuation marks between spectacles, and Rome cheers them like comedy routines. Then the gladiators stride out, armoured, gleaming, weary, determined. The noise crashes over them like a tidal wave. Chants, cries, demands for blood. Blades meet shields, steel rings against steel, and men topple into the sand with every strike. Some die instantly, others inch by inch, and the crowd savours both. The Emperor flicks his hand lazily, granting mercy to one, death to another, his gestures as casual as tossing crumbs to pigeons. The Colosseum drinks greedily from their suffering, and the crowd leaves satiated. As evening falls, Rome spills outward again. Taverns fill with men too drunk to remember which debts they owe, mugs crashing against tables sticky with spilled wine. Dice games escalate into shouting matches, which escalate into brawls. Prostitutes lean from doorways, promising distraction, while thieves glide past like shadows, plucking purses with fingers lighter than air. Fires blaze in braziers, throwing uneven light across alleys where arguments fester and fists settle disputes. Musicians strum broken melodies, their notes swallowed by the noise of men trying to forget the day's brutality with wine that tastes like vinegar. The insula groans under its weight as tenants drag themselves home. The stairs creak, walls sweat with damp, and voices seep through thin partitions. Children crying, couples arguing, a man coughing deep and ragged into the night. Your own pallet of straw greets you, scratchy and alive with fleas, but exhaustion pins you down before complaint can form. Outside, the chorus resumes. Dogs, drunks, babies, vendors still shouting to no one. Rome hums endlessly, never still, never quiet. Sleep when it comes is shallow and fragile, more a truce with the city than rest. Morning drags itself across the city like a tired soldier. Doors slam, shutters rattle, buckets splash as slaves rush to fetch water before their masters wake. The streets reek, ash, dung, and cabbage boiled past recognition, while bakers squat before their ovens, hair slick with sweat, eyes glazed with exhaustion. Their bread emerges in loaves, thick and uneven, half burned in places and raw in others. People still line up, clutching coins like charms against hunger, tearing into crusts that cut gums and leave mouths dry. Rome doesn't offer delicacies, it offers proof you're alive enough to chew. By mid-morning, the streets are clogged with carts and curses. Mule drivers lash their beasts while arguing about who has the right of way on a road, barely wide enough for one. Vendors pitch their voices to the heavens, shouting about the virtues of vegetables already wilting in the sun. A fishmonger lays out his catch with theatrical flair, but the smell tells the truth. If those fish are fresh, then the Tiber is wine. Beggars settle near the busier stalls, groaning like professional mourners, while children dart between legs with practice fingers that lift purses lighter than bread crusts. Rome's economy runs as much on theft as on trade. The Forum thrums with self-importance, senators sweeping in as if the stones themselves should applaud their sandals. Orators bellow until their veins bulge, denouncing corruption while making secret deals behind their backs. Philosophers quarrel so loudly about the nature of the universe that one could almost believe the world depended on their spit. Onlookers mill about, more entertained by watching dignified men lose their tempers than by the words themselves. And in the corner a trial stumbles forward. A man accused of watering wine too much. He protests, but the crowd has already turned it into a comedy. Guilt is inevitable. Rome doesn't like weak wine, and it likes excuses even less. At noon, the Colosseum swallows its audience whole. Trumpets shriek, drums pound, and the gates release today's curiosities. Bears from the forests of Germania, shaggy and bewildered in the blinding sun. The hunters goad them, the crowd shrieks approval, and the beasts thrash until spears and exhaustion finish them. Vendors weave through the benches, selling honey cakes sticky with flies, cups of vinegar wine, and handfuls of nuts priced like jewels. Children laugh and cheer, their hands sticky, their eyes wide as men are mauled before them. Rome calls it tradition. You call it madness with a marketing department. The executions drag out the spectacle as always. Prisoners shuffle forward in chains, their faces pale, their clothes tattered. Some plead, others snarl, one laughs hysterically until his throat is cut. The methods vary, thrown to beasts, stabbed by gladiators, burned for the crowd's amusement. No matter the outcome, the audience demands variety, as if cruelty were a dish that must be seasoned differently each day. If the victims die too quickly, the benches echo with boos. Nothing is more dangerous in Rome than boring a crowd. The gladiators thunder into the arena to finish the day. Shields clash, swords ring, and blood sprays across sand already thick with it. Men fight with desperation, some with skill, some with panic, all with the knowledge that Rome will devour them whether they win or lose. The emperor gestures idly, deciding mercy or death as if choosing which finger to scratch. The crowd roars approval at every outcome, because Rome loves victory, Rome loves defeat, and most of all, Rome loves the spectacle of men collapsing for its pleasure. When the sun drops, the crowd spills into the streets like wine from an overturned jug. Taverns groan under the crush, their air thick with sour drink and louder boasts. Dice roll, debts pile, fists fly, and laughter rattles walls thin as parchment. Prostitutes beckon from shadows. Thieves brush past with purses already palmed. Beggars moan from doorways, and stray dogs fight over scraps with the same ferocity seen in the arena hours earlier. The difference between spectacle and street is mostly scale. Back at the insula, the climb is as punishing as any gauntlet. The walls sweat with damp, the stairs wobble like drunks, and your room waits with its pallet of straw and fleas rehearsing their nightly assault. You collapse, too weary to swat or curse, your ears filled with the muffled chorus of dogs barking, infants wailing, and men arguing over debts they'll never pay. Sleep arrives grudgingly, as shallow and fragile as the plaster walls around you, but even this restless surrender feels like a victory in Rome. The day begins with the sound of doors slamming and buckets splashing, the city announcing itself with less grace than a drunk falling downstairs. The streets are damp from night filth tossed into the gutters, leaving a slick mosaic of ash, cabbage water, and things best not identified. Bakers knead dough with mechanical despair, their arms dusted white, their hair matted with sweat. The loaves emerge steaming and fragrant, but their crusts are already hard enough to chip a tooth. Buyers mutter curses as they pay, but they chew anyway, because in Rome, bread is less food than contract. Swallow, suffer, survive. By mid-morning, the city surges into motion, carts groaning through alleys too narrow to hold them, mules dragging loads fit for siege engines. Drivers curse, vendors shriek, and pedestrians scuttle between wheels with the fatalism of gamblers. The markets swell into chaos, figs so bruised they collapse at a touch, olives floating in brine that tastes like seawater poured through rust, and wine stretched so thin it could pass for river water. Beggars crouch at every corner, coughing, groaning, wailing, performances sharpen to lure pity but rarely coins. Children weave like shadows through the crowd, snatching whatever their small hands can grab, then vanishing into alleys before punishment can land. At the Forum, the city's appetite for performance shifts from food to pride. Senators strut with their spotless togas, spotless because slaves scrubbed them through the night. Orators thunder until their voices crack, proclaiming morality while their purses bulge with bribes. Philosophers quarrel over the soul of man with more spit than sense, their students rolling dice behind them. A public trial provides the day's diversion. A merchant accused of selling watered wine. He insists he's innocent, but the crowd jeers him anyway. The verdict is swift, the sentence brutal, and Rome congratulates itself on justice while trading gossip about who bribed whom. By noon, the Colosseum yawns open once more, swallowing thousands with the ease of a god inhaling incense. Trumpets blast, gates creak, and the hunts begin. Leopards today, their sleek bodies lashing, their teeth snapping at hunters who dance just close enough to provoke. The animals bleed, the men bleed, the sand drinks both, and the crowd howls. Vendors climb the steps with trays of figs, honey cakes, and sour wine, shouting prices above the roar of beasts and men. A child drops a cake onto the sand below, and the crowd laughs harder at the sight of it being trampled than at a man losing his arm. In Rome, amusement is a cheap coin, and everything pays. The executions that follow blur cruelty with theatre. Prisoners are dragged into the arena, their crimes shouted for all to jeer. One collapses before the spectacle begins. The crowd boos until he is hauled upright to die properly. Another is forced to fight an armed guard with nothing but a stick, his fate already certain. Death arrives in slices, stabs, or teeth, and the benches erupt in cheer each time. Rome may honour gods, but it worships death most faithfully. Gladiators close the day, marching into the light like doomed actors taking the stage. Shields slam, swords flash, helmets dent. They fight with precision, desperation, and despair, their bodies breaking for the pleasure of others. The Emperor waves his hand idly, sealing fates with less thought than he spends on dinner. One man survives, another doesn't, but the outcome matters less than the roar of 20,000 throats. Rome drinks their lives in gulps, and the Colosseum waits to be filled again tomorrow. By evening the crowd empties into taverns that bellow with noise. Wine sloshes, dice roll, debts multiply, and fights erupt faster than mugs can be filled. Prostitutes lure customers with voices like promises and eyes like traps. Thieves move like smoke, lifting purses from belts with the ease of breathing. Fires burn in iron braziers, smoke turning the sky blacker than night. Musicians scrape half melodies that vanish under the din. The whole city is drunk, loud, staggering, and still restless. And later, the insula waits. The stairs groan, the walls drip, the rooms close in. Your palate greets you like an old enemy, scratchy, filthy, but inevitable. Fleas rise like soldiers to their post, gnawing with military precision. Outside, the familiar chorus carries on. Dogs barking, babies wailing, drunkards mangling hymns to gods who surely stopped listening centuries ago. You lie back, too weary to resist, too tired to care, sinking into a shallow, broken sleep. Rome hums beyond the walls, patient, relentless, already preparing tomorrow. The morning is a racket before it's even light. Buckets clatter down stairwells, sandals slap against wet cobblestones, and the first arguments of the day echo between stone walls. Slaves hurry with water jars so heavy they bend like reeds, while their masters shout from windows about imagined delays. The smell of bread drifts out from the ovens, tempting but misleading. The loaves look golden but shatter like pottery when broken. Buyers chew anyway, grimacing with each bite because Rome offers two choices, broken bread or empty hands. No one complains too loudly. Complaints rarely change bread, but they do attract attention, and attention in this city is never safe. The markets flare alive as the sun climbs, a symphony of shouting, swearing, and lying. A merchant swears his figs came straight from paradise, though they're bruised and crawling with ants. Another insists his olive oil will cure headaches, impotence, and possibly bankruptcy. A butcher waves his cleaver like a conductor's baton, splattering blood as if to emphasize his words. Fishmongers thump their boards, displaying carcasses so pungent the dogs hesitate, and weaving through it all are children with sticky fingers, slipping apples from baskets and coins from purses, vanishing into the crowd with the agility of cats. The beggars stay low to the ground, coughing, groaning, stretching thin hands as though trying to drag pity down from the sky. The forum, as always, transforms into theatre. Senators sweep past in togas cleaner than their reputations, leaving trails of sandal polish and hypocrisy. Orators thunder about the decay of Roman morals while eyeing each other's slaves. Philosophers argue so fiercely about the nature of virtue that one knocks over a column of scrolls, sending them fluttering like oversized confetti. The crowd laughs, not at the arguments, but at the spectacle of men who believe words can move mountains, while unable to move pigeons off their shoulders. At one end of the square, a trial unfolds, a man accused of shortchanging soldiers. His guilt is certain, his punishment predictable, and the audience applauds the verdict like they would a well-delivered punchline. By midday, the Colosseum consumes the city again. Trumpets split the air, the gates grind open, and a parade of animals staggers into the arena. Today, it's camels, bewildered creatures forced into combat they don't understand. The hunters prod them, the beasts spit in protest, and the crowd howls with laughter, delighted at the absurdity of foreign animals dragged into Roman misery. Vendors shout prices above the noise, selling wine sour enough to clean armour, and bread rolls harder than helmets. Children cheer, nobles wave handkerchiefs, and the sand stains darker with every blow. The executions follow, grim punctuation between laughter and blood. Prisoners shuffle forward, each paired with a sentence more theatrical than the last. One is tossed to wolves, another forced to run circles until collapsing from exhaustion before a spear ends him. The crowd jeers at cowardice, cheers at suffering, boos at quick deaths. Rome demands cruelty in installments, paid out like coins over the course of an afternoon. To the condemned, death is final. To the audience, its entertainment value measured in screams. Gladiators bring the day to its height. Men clad in dented armour stride into the sun, greeted with a roar loud enough to crack marble. They fight brutally, desperately, the clash of blades ringing out like drums. Blood sprays, bones crack, sand turns slick. The crowd chants, calling for mercy and death in the same breath, as though both were equally satisfying. The emperor gestures lazily, his thumb twitching one way or another, and destinies unravel in seconds. Rome has many gods, but none so immediate as an emperor's whim. When the sun dips, the crowd pours back into the streets, swollen with noise and wine-soaked cheer. Taverns erupt with songs slurred into nonsense. Dice clatter across warped tables. Debts are shouted into existence, and fists settle them faster than ink. Prostitutes circle like hawks, thieves like shadows, beggars like ghosts. Fires burn in iron braziers, musicians scrape crooked notes into the air, and the city hums with drunken joy laced with violence. Rome never rests, it only changes costumes. At the Insula, the climb up the stairs feels like punishment. The walls drip with damp, the air reeks of smoke and sweat, and your room greets you with fleas eager for their feast. You collapse onto the pallet, body aching, mind buzzing with the din of the day. Outside, the chorus continues, barking, crying, shouting, the endless noise of a city that refuses silence. Sleep takes you eventually, shallow and jagged, less relief than surrender. Rome waits outside, already preparing tomorrow's demands. And so, dear listener, the days of Rome blur into one another. Bread that breaks teeth, markets that reek, forums that lie, arenas that bleed, and nights that never quiet. The empire calls itself eternal, but what it truly perfected was repetition. The same noise, the same cruelty, the same hunger, dressed in different costumes. Tomorrow will arrive with the same damp streets, the same hollow bread, the same roar of the crowd demanding death for dessert. Rome does not rest, and it does not change. It only endures, grinding its people down like sand beneath sandals. Perhaps that is its secret to eternity. Not greatness, but monotony so vast it feels like forever.